To another of the video lectures post-coronavirus, sociological theory. This is part of the skeleton key to Marx's Capital, Volume 1. This will entirely focus upon the first chapter in Volume 1 of Capital, Commodities. We already lectured on it last time. I'm going to let that lecture stand. I wasn't happy with it. I was tired when I recorded it. But I want to go back through the material again today and make certain that we hit the major points again, and then we're going to end with an analysis, or at least a discussion of his analysis of something called commodity fetishism, the fetishism of commodities. Marx is easy to misunderstand, right? He has been, the image of Marx, the name of Marx, the idea of Marx has been sort of captured by, reactionary politics for more than 150 years, right? He's a notorious figure, rarely understood. Very few people actually read anything of Marx's beyond the Communist Manifesto, which we're not going to look at, right? At least not in this lecture series, right? Marx's work, the work that really matters to me as a sociologist, is his analysis of capitalism as a social system. So unlike those in the building next door where the economics department is, Marx isn't primarily interested in capitalism as a mechanism for the production of goods and services, or the provision of commodities to meeting human needs. Right? It isn't really about usefulness. To Marx, the economy, or the capitalism, is essentially a system of social domination. It's a system, a social system, a reworking of the way that human beings relate to each other. It's a reworking of capitalism. Reworks the way that human beings get a self, the way that we evaluate each other. It essentially reduces the significance of social values, traditional values that have always been a part, or the way that societies have organized themselves since the first time we crawled out of the ooze. It sort of devalues social values and emphasizes something different, economic value, and we're going to be really emphasizing that. So like today's lecture, we're going to be hitting on the idea of soul and body again, the body-soul distinction, and we're going to be emphasizing this idea that human beings are essentially animals that get a social soul, right? In many traditions, it's figured theologically, so that the social soul is imagined as a religious soul, that it comes from a god or from godly beings. But whether you think of it in social terms or in religious terms, there's an immaterial thing that animates the human being and that transforms an ape essentially into a member of a society, right? So the soul-body distinction is going to be key here. It's key to Marx, and it's going to be key to the whole semester, right? So the argument is that we are ensouled differently in capitalism, that the mechanism of mutual recognition, which we've already talked about, that was the way that human beings recognized each other and obtained a self, right? Was one body facing another body, essentially, right? Or one society with another, and that the desire of the other, what is the other one of me? What am I there in that other? What am I? That becomes the self, right? And that my soul essentially is what the other wants of me, and vice versa, right? So in sort of the in the Christian traditions, the idea of the soul, that you get a soul, you become confirmed as a Christian when you come into full awareness of what the big other, the God, wants of me. And often it's an imitation of Christ. You're going to lead a Christly life or something like that, right? But it's coming into possession of a knowledge of what the other wants of me. That's a self. When you go through training to become, say, a teacher, or to become an accountant, or to become an auto mechanic, or to become virtually any calling, the process of learning that task is to come into possession of what is wanted of me. What am I there in my employer? What am I there in my client? What am I there, right? What does that other want of me? And then how do I embody that, right? So that other's desire is what essentially animates the animal and makes us into social beings. Okay, so we understand that, right? That mutual recognition and the kind of play of desires determines the self, the ego, the id, right? We kind of get that. And that this has been the way that human beings have essentially become ensouled since the beginning of time. So, in Hegel's work, the title is The Phenomenology of Spirit, correct? The Phenomenology of Spirit. In German, it's actually Geist, 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 which can be translated ghost or spirit, right? And so or mind. Sometimes it's translated as mind. And so this is, that society essentially is a, in computer terms, it's like it generates a software that then can be installed into hardware, the body of human beings, and essentially that's what a soul is. And that the book, The Phenomenology of Spirit, is an analysis, a kind of, analytic reconstruction of the shape and the alteration of the soul structure of society. Again, from the first time we crawled out of the ooze and developed language and said God and no, right? From that moment forward till now, what has happened to the shape of souls? So souls, Geist, ghost, spirit, mind, all of these things are together. And so when we develop a self, like in Goffman's work, right? When you develop a self, the self is not an actual physical mask. It's a spirit that we obtain and then animate, right? And they generally come from society, and this is the process. So the main idea is that is that the others are mirrors for us, and that we obtain a sense of self, a kind of social soul, through the mirroring process, face to face. What Marx is going to argue is that in capitalism, this alters, and that in many ways we are determined, we're socially structured, we are ensouled even behind our back. That the structuring principle, the value principle that dominates in modern capitalism isn't the face-to-face world of social values like it was in every traditional village, clan, or tribe. Instead, the structuring principle of value occurs behind our backs, not face-to-face, outside of our awareness in many ways. And he's going to argue in that first chapter on Commodities that capitalism presents itself as commodities, right? And he's going to analyze the commodity relationship and the way that commodities have value vis-a-vis each other. And he's going to argue that odd principle of economic exchange, where you're exchanging commodity to commodity, determines what human value is, what social value is, what the value of the worker is, and so on. And the entire system of capital is structured by this behind our back arrangement of commodity exchange, right? So there it is. So really fast, I brought some of my toys from my kid today. So capital presents itself as a vast accumulation of commodities. Let me tell you that my daughter's closet, she's in college now, but her closet certainly presents itself as a vast accumulation of commodities. And I asked her this morning to get me some of the toys that she played with as a kid. And I got to tell you, I was amazed at what she unpacked for me. It's like, so she's got, I don't know, all of these like little, here's the little boy. We've got a little girl of some kind. It's like, hi there. Anyway, and that along with these little critters, and I have no idea what their supposed to names are, Cheech, Chong, I don't know, Bert, Ernie, thing one, thing two is probably what we'll use. But at any rate, their world is absolutely jam-packed and populated by commodities. And even, not just commodities, okay, this is Barbie, but there was even, included in her toys were Barbie, so what is it, Hasbro or Mattel or whoever the hell produces this thing, sorry, I don't know, but they produce even little advertisements for, this is for the Barbie magic coffee maker or something like that. So included in the commodities in this world of toys that my kid played with are advertisements for additional ones, which is kind of weird, so I don't know, all kinds of products that are here. So capitalism, Marx says, presents itself to us on the surface as this vast accumulation of commodities. And again, my kid's drawer is one of them. There it is, all this stuff. So somehow or other, we know that in capitalism, all of these commodities can be equated to each other, and that when you go to a store and you got all this stuff, right, that each of these commodities relates to other commodities in terms of price, right? You walk in and you know this is 79 cents and that's 82 cents or $1.59 or whatever, and that all of these commodities, again, kind of relate to each other in there's even sunglasses here. There's a bale of hay here. There's some sort of little love pillow. Anyway, but all of these commodities, as diverse as they are, sunglasses and a bale of hay, for example, can be related to each other through money, right? At least through what appears to be this value system. So on the surface, this is what capitalism is. If you go on Amazon, you get Wikibuy. You get these strange opportunities to price shop and to compare the one commodity to another in terms of its quality, but really quantity, price, right? So all commodities are related to each other. And this seems to be the structuring principle of capitalism. Marx is going to tell us it is. But underneath the structure of commodity to commodity relationships lies relationship of people to people, right? So the different producers in the system, right, are also being related to each other, but they're no longer doing it face to face, right, in a system of mutual recognition. Instead, the structuration principle is happening behind their back in this odd system of commodity production and exchange, right? So it's happening behind your back. So you're getting ensold, you're getting determined, you're getting valued behind your back, right? So this is an inversion of traditional societies where social values are face-to-face things, and you're ensouled in sort of interaction rituals and rites of passage and so on. In our time, you're determined behind your back in a social unconscious through the exchange of commodities in value. And so that first chapter is this astonishingly important analysis of the reconstruction of social life in capitalism. And most critics of Marx, anybody that you're going to hear in sort of American politics critiquing Marx or slamming Marx's professors, whatever they're doing, they're not thinking in terms of chapter 1 in Capital. They're thinking probably in terms of some distorted reading of the Communist Manifesto. So to me, Marx's value isn't as some sort of framer of revolution or agitator for revolution. His power really, and what he really spent most of his life doing, was analyzing capitalism as a social system. And so his work, Das Kapital, 1867, an astonishingly powerful comprehension of capital systematically as an arrangement, not just of production and exchange, the kind of things that go on in the economics department next door, but rather as an entirely new world of ensoulment, of valuation, of social life, right? And he's trying to help us understand how that operates. Okay, so there it is. So on the surface, in that first chapter, capitalism presents itself as a vast accumulation of commodities, and they seem simple at first, but like he says, by the time you get to the fetishism section, they're actually fantastic things, right? They're quite fantastic. So I wonder if we can actually read that. Yeah, so there it is. So a commodity, he says, this is on page 319 in Tucker. A commodity appears at first sight a very trivial thing and easily understood. Its analysis shows, however, that it is in reality a very queer thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties, right? So as he tells us, right, so far as it is a value in use, right, as something to drink, or as here some sort of bizarre rice banana cereal, it as something to use, it's really, there's nothing very mystical about it. We understand it, we comprehend it. It's capable of satisfying human wants, right? And it is clear as noonday, right? You don't have to have a degree in philosophy to comprehend what a bloody box of banana cereal does for you, or what that does, or what this does, or whatever. This what carrots are. We all know what they are. We know that we buy them, people produce them, and we eat them, and that they satisfy needs. Clear as the noonday sun, right? All right, but what he's doing in this first chapter is helping us to see that underneath these things is something social, something purely spiritual, right? So he goes on. The form of wood is altered by making a table out of it, yet for all of that, the table continues to be that common everyday thing, wood, but so soon as it steps forth as a commodity. So as soon as a table ceases to be a thing to, write upon or something like that, as soon as it becomes a commodity, as soon as it's produced for a market and exchange, it is changed into something transcendent. It gets a soul, right? So it's touched by, the big other, right? And it becomes haunted by, ensouled by, right, the big other. It's transcendent. It's not only stands with its feet on the ground and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas. Okay, there it is. Yeah, it not only stands with its feet on the ground, but in relation to all other commodities, it stands on its head and evolves out of its wooden brain grotesque ideas, far more wonderful than table turning ever was, right? So, so you got the, okay, so the mystical character of commodities is what he's trying to get to, right? And so that's what we're trying to understand. Where does it come from? What is this mysticism that's embedded in commodities? And that's, again, where we're headed here in the Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret Thereof section on page 319 of Tucker. Okay? All right. So again, really fast, in the same way that the mirror, right, generates the appearance of my other, right? I don't know if that it isn't working very well, but you get it, right? That the mirror, okay. So that the mirror is the mechanism through which we get a view of the self and so on. We've talked about that. The way that this operated in human history. Now we have a reconstruction of that in our time. Okay, so let's set aside the commodities, and we're going to come back to this as we go forward. We're going to use these toys, hopefully, to make a point. Okay, so let's try to hit the main points again. So in the commodities, it's a vast accumulation of commodities. That's what capitalism presents itself as. It's essentially Amazon. So there's massive warehouses somewhere loaded with the things that are produced by human labor all over the globe, right? That's what it presents itself as. And he's telling us right away that commodities aren't simple objects, but they're doubled, right? They are a useful thing that satisfies our thirst, and they're a soul. They've got a body and a soul, and the soul is value. And he's going to tell us again, the value is the jelly, the quantity of jelly, social jelly, the jelly of social labor that is attached to, congealed in, absorbed by the commodity in the process of its production. So while a laborer, a concrete laborer, is making, this little love pillow, anyway, or this plastic bale of hay, as this is being made, they're not only making the physical object, but they're generating and creating this thing called value. And value, as he tells us again, is not something that you can ever see or that doesn't actually live within the object. It only exists elsewhere and takes the form of another commodity, right? So it's just like my image is something I can never comprehend directly. I can only comprehend it elsewhere, right? When it but by seeing it reflected off of another, off of a mirror surface. So again, in practical terms, I am determined by, defined by the other's as reflected off of other people's reactions to me. I get a self when someone tells me I must be a self, that kind of thing, or when someone reflects itself back to me. So in the same way, the value of a commodity isn't there on the surface or something that you can locate within the commodity. It can only be realized, it can only appear in the form of another commodity when it's exchanged, okay? So value is a tough thing to get to here, and it's different from the way that value is arrived at in every other system, okay? So again, so he has the labor theory of value is absolutely central to Marx. So value is congealed social labor. So the value of a thing isn't the concrete labor that went into its manufacture. That's not what determines value. The value of a thing is the amount of socially necessary labor time, right? Social labor that is realized when the commodity that's produced enters the market and it is exchanged or can be exchanged for others. So the value that is realized of the labor that was made, that was used to produce it, is it takes the form of the other objects, the other commodities that can be exchanged for it. Okay, so again, value then is a social unconscious, a structuring principle that displaces all other systems of direct social recognition. That means that social values as such, traditional values as such, are obliterated by capital. Now, I wrote a book with my friend Bill Swart on NASCAR and Sturgis and the new economy of spectacle, and the entire book is really about taking a legend of outlaws from popular culture, from folk culture even, and the way that capitalism subsumes that folk thing, that value of being an outlaw biker, an outlaw rum running racer, something like that, and subsumes that as a way to make money, and then repackages it and sells it as an image to make money. So it isn't that social values completely go away. It's just that they become transformed, they become subsumed, they become overwritten by the logic of value. So really important, again, social values, traditional social values, whether they're religious or the value of the dead in war, anything like that. Those traditional values where people have died to defend a particular set of values are overwritten, right, by the logic of value. They don't entirely go away, but they become incorporated into capitalism's value system. So they become reworked. So again, it's a bizarrest thing in our time, the way that pro-business, pro-capitalist politicians have found a way to link themselves up to the defenders of traditional value. Because in the end, as we're going to talk about really for the rest of the semester, the power in modernity lies in capital, right? And that the structuring principle of value and the manufacture of value that takes place behind the backs of human beings is the thing that is challenging and destroying traditional social values, right? And if those values continue on in capital, they continue on in as transformed things that have been made into commodities for sale, that kind of stuff. So you'll find, for example, like if this is true, then what you would expect to find is that traditional religious ideas aren't valued in and of themselves by capital, but are only valuable if they become linked into a system of money making, right, in some way. So we know that the prosperity gospel right now, the gospel of health and wealth that has become so popular, and you really the fastest growing religious variant right now in global capital is the prosperity gospel. The idea that if you become a member of the Church of Christ, right? If you become that you can become healthy and wealthy through, in other words, that you can become successful in capital by becoming religious, something like that. So if Marx is right, and if the structuring principle of our modern world is value, then traditional social values are going to be overwritten, overlaid, and incorporated into value. They're going to be transformed. So again, it's a bizarre thing right now in global politics to see how often the political movements that are pro-capital and are pushing for deregulation and pushing for maximization of profit and so on, and the elimination of all barriers to full-on accumulation by capital, right? That those political actors are often wed to those who are defending traditional values, right? And so, so what you really have is a bizarre thing where the capital as the value system is the threat, the primary threat, destroying traditional social values, and yet they're wed together in a bizarre kind of marriage of convenience, and it really has become the political power of our time, not just in America, but throughout global modernity. This powerful engine where pro-capital and pro-traditional value forces are united. Okay, so this is it. So what is value then? Value is socially necessary labor time. It's the quantity of social jelly, social labor, that is necessary to produce a thing, and that is realized when that thing is exchanged for another thing. Okay? So it is the labor theory of value. It is the labor of human beings, energy, thought, attention, that's been kind of homogenized. It is the amount of that homogeneous, standardized social labor necessary to produce an item as it's realized in exchange, right? That is the qualitative content of value is congealed social labor, and the quantity of social value is determined in the equivalence in the marketplace, right? It takes the appearance of the thing to which that can be exchanged. Okay, all right. So the form of value then. So value he talks about as a jelly, congealed. Now we know that the thing that congeals, when I think of something congealing, I always think of blood. And so, I taught a course a few years ago here on the undead in contemporary society, where we looked at vampire films and zombie films. And Marx in Capital frequently deploys the language and the imagery of vampires and werewolves and bloodsuckers, right? To reference the to try to explain to his readers the system of capital. And so we're going to be doing the same thing as we go. I've got an image of that here, but we'll do that later. But blood congeals, right? So blood is flowing and living, right? It goes through your veins as liquid, right? But then if you get a cut, it comes out and it congeals. It becomes hardened and it's externalized. So when blood is externalized or alienated from the body, it congeals and becomes a different substance, right? It's dead, right? So dead blood that was living but has passed into death, congeals and becomes a different object, right? Okay. Well, that's the same thing with labor. So labor that's living inside the body is a certain amount of energy and potential, muscle power, brain power, and so on. And when it's alienated from the body and it takes the form of a commodity like this doll, right? It's congealed. So what this doll is essentially is concealed human labor. If you think of labor as blood, this is essentially congealed blood, something like a scab. I know that that's a really gross thing, but that's essentially what Marx is saying, is that if we could see clearly, so if we can equate labor to blood, then the commodities produced by human labor are essentially congealed dead blood scabs, right? So it's a weird concept to think about that. So again, you wouldn't want to, give a scab to your child to play with, but in essence, that's what you're doing, that this is dead human labor. It's human labor that has died in a process of production. Okay. So there it is. So he keeps talking about social jelly. So if you've ever seen clear jelly or gelatin that hasn't been colored by, the dyes or the food coloring that's used by Jello Corporation. If you think of clear Jello, it doesn't have a form, especially when it's kind of liquidy. It just sort of blobs out, right? And so it needs a form. So a Jello form, a gelatin form, right? A gelatin mold gives it form. So Marx tells us so a commodity then is essentially a body or a mold that contains and gives form to the congealed social labor that produces it, okay? So we have trouble seeing the congealed social labor, the scab of blood, right? We can't see it very easily. We're not trained to do it. What we see is the thing that was produced, the body, the external sensory thing. But if we could see it, well, again, we'd be able to recognize that there's a certain amount of social jelly inside of this thing, and that we can only see that when it takes the appearance of another commodity, when the two things are exchanged with each other. Okay. All right, so there it is. So what enables the appearance of this immaterial thing, of this almost invisible jelly? What enables its appearance is the exchange. So when one commodity is exchanged for another, the value of the commodity is determined by the other commodity to which it is capable of being exchanged, right? So if we have a two-commodity system, let's get rid of the kids because that would be a weird thing. We'd be in human trafficking. So let's say we have the love pillow and the bale of hay. this is our two commodity system. We have the producers and sellers of the bale of hay. What's the value of this bloody thing? Well, it's the congealed social labor that was necessary to produce it. How do we see it? How do we appear? Well, it's when so let's say there's only two things produced in our economy, two things: love pillows and bales of hay. So the bale of hay, we can see its value when it takes the appearance of the amount of love pillow that the bale of hay would be exchanged for, right? So let's say one bale of hay equals one love pillow, then we know that the value of a bale of hay is a love pillow. So if we were to put a price tag in a two commodity system on each of these things, we would say, the price tag would say, here's a bale of hay, put a price tag equals one love pillow instead of money. And then we take the love pillow and we would have a little tag that says bale of hay, one bale of hay, right? That's what the equivalent would be. So the value, the amount of social labor that's in that takes the form of the love pillow. So what does that mean? That means it's actually the amount of social labor necessary to produce this thing, right, is equivalent. So again, the love pillow and the bale of hay are the appearance, right? The appearance, the form, the appearance of the value in each. So to do this, I want to actually put this in mirror terms. So let's go ahead and take a piece of tin foil because I happen to have it. All right. So one commodity becomes a mirror for the other. So in order to find out what is the value, the amount of congealed social stuff, social labor, right, social jelly inside of that is represented by the production of this thing, the love pillow. You have to present that commodity, into the marketplace where it sees another commodity and it looks into the mirror of another commodity, and that commodity says, "Oh, I now see myself in you. I see that I have value because I can see." Sorry about the voice, but anyway, I can see that I have value because I can now see myself in your form, right? So I'm looking at myself in the mirror of another commodity, and I see value. So the great social realist artist Hugo Gellert always depicts, right? It's in my map of capital that we were using, that I shared with you the last time. That in the map of capital, Hugo Gellert always uses a fist of labor to represent value. So that when one commodity looks into another, it sees how much congealed society or congealed social labor is in it, essentially, or is tethered to it, or is realized in the exchange process. So there it is. So each commodity then, I'll rip off another piece. Each commodity becomes a mirror to the other. And in a world of a whole bunch of commodities, if we could do this, let's take the baby here. Okay, so the baby. All right. Let's take the shoe. We'll put the shoe there. So all of these different commodities here. We'll take the Cheerios. That what Marx tells us is when you go into a marketplace and you exchange these things, they've exchanged with each other, and each of them becomes an indicator or a mirror that reveals the value, the congealed labor within each of them. Okay? So again, what we want to do when we go into the world of created by capital, a world that looks like an accumulation of commodities, we want to be able to see that they are mirroring back to each other that each commodity becomes a form of appearance of the value in the other. They're a mirror in which each commodity can see itself. Okay? All right. Now let's look at that. And so now we're back to our argument about society. So remember our claim. Our claim was that in essence, if we have two people, right, that person one is determined by the desire of the other. So let's put this. So this is a mirror surface again. So we have, "Hi, how are you? What am I to you? I can see myself in you, and now I know I have a self. Myself isn't in me. Myself is a virtual thing that comes because I can see your desire for me." Something along those lines, right? So this is my old trick, that if I could get my children at 8 years old to understand an idea, I know I've got it, right? But in essence, that's what happens, right? Two people come into contact with each other, and for the purpose of the encounter, right, the other person's desire determines who you are, right, and your motive of behavior and so on, right? Now you may not want their desire, which means you're gonna stand in conflict with them, but that in essence is what occurs. So this idea of mutual recognition, of the social generation of the self, of ensoulment and so on, is important. And then we know in religious terms. So let's say that here we're living in a totemic society now, and that Mr. Leopard here, the leopard boy, that this becomes. So let's say we're in a totemistic society, and we decide that we are the children of the leopard, and then we elevate the leopard to the position of the totem, the local god, essentially. Then as we look into the totem of the god, right, let's say that there's an actual totem, an actual carved object, right, that represents the leopard, and that we sacrifice to it, we kill goats before it and that kind of thing, right, or a cat, whatever we do to feed the leopard. And then we honor and worship it, right? We all bow down before it. So everybody, again, worships, bow there. They bow, they prostrate themselves before the leopard, that kind of thing. Well, what the leopard does, this doesn't just receive the social labor, but the leopard becomes a mirror into which the social members gaze and get back a sense of self, right? So writ large, society generates these mirrors of a collective representation of society itself. In this leopard society, it's the leopard icon, right? And in ritual, the members of the society gaze into the mirror object of the totem, and they see themselves, right? They get reflected back to them some idea of who they are. And if you're a child, where's my baby? I had a baby here somewhere. Where's the baby? I don't see the baby. I've killed my baby. There was a baby here. There's the baby. Okay. So you're a young baby wearing this bizarre checked coverall. Anyway, you're a baby, and you're watching all of the adults in your group honor and worship and bow down and prostrate themselves before this thing. You're going to believe that that thing is real, and that the forces that are being generated through the worship, the labor of the other people, their labor of prostration, their labor that went into producing the firstborn calf that was sacrificed, or the firstborn kitten that was taken and sacrificed, right? Whatever went into the sacrificial feeding and worship of this thing, that's real, right? And you're going to see then, watching the other members of your society honoring and worship that thing, you're going to see that they're seeing themselves reflected back in it, that power is real, and then you're going to be, in your own ritual, getting back a little bit of that power in the form of a soul, right? A soul. So society generates these totemic things then that come back to us and give us a sense of society. So in the Tierra del Fuego society that we were talking about in one of the previous videos, so let's say that here we have the totemic object, and that this group of men is stripped down uncomfortably in a cold climate and engaged in a ritual, heats them up with collective effervescence. But what they're doing is honoring with their energy, they're honoring their social collective representation, their God, their totemic God thing, right? Which is really them, they're essentially honoring the society itself, right? So again, a little child who's observing this ritual is watching all of this energy being expended laboriously and uncomfortably upon a ritual that realizes the group's spirit, the Geist of the group, the spirit of the group, the mind of the group, right? And then, again, through some ritual, this is all part of an initiation ritual, which we showed last time, right? There's elaborate initiation rituals in which the initiates, lay on the ground, die to their childhood self, and then obtain a social self later, right? So you become empowered, ensouled through these rituals in which a little bit of this social power that's been honored and fed and so on by the group becomes part of you, right? Okay. So we've talked about that now, the way that human beings have always sort of become social. Let's do this ensoulment process. And then we know that social things are real because we watch people, again, prostrate themselves before them. So men prostrating before an altar, anyone who sees that knows that there's something powerful in that altar, because all of that energy, these men died, at least in the moment, they fell, right? There's value there because of the behavior of the people there. So again, the universalistic signal of that something has value is when we fall down before it, right? When we fall down before it, even if it's falling down before troops that are conquering us, that kind of thing. Okay. So really fast then, this image that I showed last time is important. So this is an image of the electroplating of a dead, I'm afraid it's a baby here. So I wish it was bigger. I wish it wasn't a baby, because then you get all that feeling that goes along with that. But the idea is electroplating, of course, puts a chrome surface on some sort of shiny chrome surface on the body. So let's imagine that in the process of doing this, the child that has died, right? So let's say, I'm going to make this up entirely, but I think this works. In a traditional society, let's say that there was a lottery held, or that there was a competition held, and that the most beautiful baby, or the first baby born in a given year, was sacrificed, right? Killed and electroplated. So that baby has, or that child has fallen and fed the God thing, and that in exchange for it being agreed to be the hero of the group, or to die for the group, to fall for the group, right? To vol, right? To fall. You have valor, and you have value, and you are now you're allowed to go to essentially Valhalla, right? The hall of the dead. And so you get this electroplated version of yourself, which is after you're gone, which is again has a mirror surface to it, so that other members of the group then can look into the object, that's been created, and can see the value that went into the production of that thing. And then again, there's an honoring and a worship of it. An additional value, additional depth, additional social energy is expended upon feeding and honoring that icon that represents this sacrificial act of a hero, something along those lines. So I just really like this image. It's grotesque. I understand that. It's painful. Sorry about that. But this idea that it is in death, the fall, right? That value refers to the fall, the death, right? And that in the process of either production, in traditional societies, you generate an icon or a totem, an image of some kind that is like a reflective surface that allows the social members to see themselves and lets them get a soul, something like that, right? So that previous energy fell valorously into the creation of the gods, or into the creation of the icons that are then worshipped and honored. In capitalism, there's something similar. So people work, and they're going to die by the hour or die by the minute into the production of a thing. So here we have these men. We're going to assume that they're making a lot of money by generating the electroplated body. And their time, they're dying into this, right? And what's left behind then is an object and a certain amount of congealed social, congealed society, congealed social energy, congealed social labor, congealed socially necessary labor time, a jelly of social substance that is represented by or tethered to, invisibly, without form, to this thing. And then it is when, it's through the exchange process that comes out. So then both in traditional societies with values and in modern society with value, we get these elaborate processes whereby human beings combine their social energy and generate something of worth that leads to bending and distortions of social relations later on, right? Okay. And Marx is going to say that the production of value operates very differently than social values in previous times. So how does that work? So let's try to look at this again. So in traditional societies that have traditional social or ideal values, right? I'm using Boogel's terms here. In my own terms, I just use social values, right? that again, you have rituals that generate sacrifice that is then represented in a totemic image of the collective representation of the group is going to be like an idol, the leopard, the god thing, the totem, whatever it is, right? You get some sort of sensorily perceptible representation of an invisible collective notion, right? So you get an invisible social value that's represented by a physical object, and even if you don't have a physical object, it's represented by the interaction rituals of the group, right? The ritual conduct of the group. So again, a child watching a traditional society with social values underway is going to know that the leopard is real, the leopard god or the leopard totem is real, because they can see the reality of all of the people engaged in the ritual dying, giving time, giving energy, giving things that they have laboriously created or hunted, right? Giving that to the God thing. So again, looking into the mirror surface of this electroplated hero or electroplated God thing, or even the imaginary of it, each person is getting back reflected to them a soul, right? So they're doing sacrifice and worship, bowing down, right? Bending, bowing down, worshiping, sacrificing to the social value that's going on, and in exchange you get back a soul. You get a little piece of that collective social thing back at you, right? So that's the way this works. So society generates these elaborate, direct, ritualistic honoring of values that are then granted back, and so they're homogenized to become collectivized, and then you get a little portion of it back in the form of a soul or a spirit or a self or a geist or a ghost or something like that, right? Okay, so there it is. So the soul or the spirit double or the social double, the self of the person of the Homo sapien. Then you've got your body, and then you're getting ignited by contact with others, the mirror surface where you can see your social self, right? So face-to-face, ritual conduct, ritual activity, rites of passage, and so on that generate this notion of society. Okay. Now in modern capitalism, to Marx, this gets completely transformed. So the dominant way that value human death, human energy that's been expended in a social way, the prominent way now we're looking at economic value instead of social value. So instead of interaction rituals that generate the appearance of reality, of social values, we now have economic production that generates value. So the way that this works then in Marx, in this first chapter, is that these are the commodities. So one commodity exchanged for another. That's what's going on here. This is the moment of exchange. And behind that exchange is going to be production, right? So we have the production of things. So remember our image from last time, that production takes place in capitalism, in these with property, plant, and equipment, and raw materials, and variable capital in the form of labor. And so labor expends itself in capital to produce commodities. So capital really is this massive mechanism. This is really what capital is. It's this massive mechanism that absorbs the congealed substance of social labor from people. So capitalism is like this giant sucking machine absorbing the value from human beings. So human beings go in for a fixed period of time into a production system, and they basically die by the hour. A certain amount of their energy is sucked out and congealed in the social jelly known as value, right? Okay, and then that gets tethered to commodities, or at least it becomes in some sort of odd way absorbed in commodities, and then those commodities are exchanged, and it's in that moment of exchange, right, of one commodity exchanging for another. It's in that moment that you get the that sort of the soul of the commodity, the social substance, appears, right? So let's say that you have two so let's say that this is the plant that produces that commodity, and this is the plant that produces this commodity. These are the workers for commodity one. So here we go. For commodity one, these are the workers who produced, whose labor died into the production of those commodities. The source of the social jelly are these workers. And for commodity two, it's these workers who died, right? And who died by the hour, giving up their social jelly in value, right? And that value then is realized in an exchange process where commodity one and commodity two are exchanged with each other. And in some bizarre way, workers that produced, who had their value sucked from them and accumulated within capital in commodities, is equated with the social labor, the social jelly of workers in factory two. And so we have workers and workers who are related to each other now in an economic system, and they're exchanging, and each of them needs something. Let's say that, this set of workers produces, what were our commodities again? I've got to unwrap them. Well, here, just use these two. We absolutely need whatever that is, pumpkins, and the other one produces whatever the heck that is, French fries. And each, this group can't live without that group's pumpkins, and this group can't live without that group's French fries. We need each other. We're related to each other. We're fundamentally tied to each other, and yet we can't see each other. And that the significance that we as workers have for each other is absent. We don't see it. We only see the commodities relating to each other in the marketplace. So the value of each commodity and its proportionate exchange with other commodities, takes place in the marketplace, but behind the back of the exchange of commodities is the exchange of the labor of these people. So these people know each other. They're oddly enough responding to the same social pressure. They're honoring the same social substance value, right? They're honoring this thing. They're related to each other, but they can't recognize each other. So they're hidden. So that goes on in capital. So again, here we have, the traditional world where people relate to each other and ensole each other directly. But in capital, this set of workers here and that set of workers there, the workers that produced commodity one and the workers that produced commodity two, can't see each other. They can't recognize each other. They don't know each other. And so they know that again, pumpkins and French fries exchange for a certain proportion, but they can't see each other and recognize each other. So Marx tells us value then, which is nothing more. Value is nothing more than social jelly. It's social substance. It's human labor congealed and absorbed into a commodity through capital. This social substance can't realize itself in direct person-to-person contact. It can only realize itself, take form, when the commodities produced by one group are exchanged for the commodities of another. And this is what he tells us alters social life. We can't see each other. We can't see each other's significance. We can't see each other's contribution. We can only see in capital commodity-to-commodity exchange. And as we're going to talk about, right, that by the end of this first section, we know that money becomes the general equivalent. So that once you get into complex economy, you don't just have pumpkins and French fries, but you've got every possible, right, the vast accumulation of commodities. And we know that underneath this vast accumulation of commodities, the thing that equates them all is a general equivalent. And my daughter gave me a general equivalent, if I can find the bloody thing, and I can't, in the form of monopoly money. Here it is. Here it is. So we know that in modern capitalism, with this vast accumulation of commodities, right, all of these things, right, that we're not going in and, we don't walk in and exchange our pumpkins for everything else. We walk in and there's now distilled out a general equivalent in the form of money, right? So the money form of value. So this is nothing more than the exchange value, than the social jelly represented in money form. You don't even need the money, of course. It can just be recognized virtually, through the exchange of digits on computer screens and so on. But once you get money, what that means now is that each commodity doesn't have to look specifically into the body of another commodity to see its value, right? Or to realize its value, for value to appear. Instead, if I can get this here, I'll just use this small piece like that. Each money itself becomes a mirror, and so that each commodity can now look into the general equivalent of money and see its value in the form of honestly, a price, at least in concrete terms, a price, right? So how much social value, social jelly is in or accumulated in or accumulated and attached in some sort of mystic way to this can of stuff, well, it's 79 cents because I can look into money and see it. So money becomes this magic thing that allows people, that allows commodities to see how much social jelly is in them, how much human death, val, is congealed, and how much, the sort of the scab of society, the social jelly, is congealed here in the commodity. So the soul of the commodity becomes visible with money. Okay, so that's our big story. So again, we don't. So in a traditional society, right, that we've already talked about, in traditional society, we have we value people who are honorific heroes or people who are social superiors in some way. We honor them directly through our conduct, through the interaction rituals of deference and demeanor, right? So this is traditional society. I am your lord and master. I desire you to go work for me. This is traditional work, by the way. And then the servant says, or the slave says, I am your humble servant. I hear and obey you. Your wish is my command. Your desire determines who I am. Myself is your desire. I work. And in this world, the world of traditional economic production, money isn't the mirror. In fact, the only mirror is the face of the master. So I'm not producing something that's then going to be sold on the market, and that is what provides me with a knowledge of my value. Instead, okay, here's the king. I look into the face of the Lord, right? And I can see myself directly. And the Lord says, you are the person who works for me because I own you, and you shall labor for me. I desire your labor. I desire, a cup of coffee, or a jug of whiskey, or some fine mint julep on a porch, a fine old glass of lemonade, right? And you shall go and get that for me, or make that for me. And so you produce not because you're working in a marketplace for a wage. You produce because you see yourself reflected in the face of the master who you are directly associated with. Okay? So traditional societies, in most homes are like this, right? I don't pay my children to do dishes. I simply say, I am your father. I am your father. You shall do what I say. And they do, right? They hop right to it. The dishes are done, and so on. And they say to me things like, I need, Dad, I'd like to go somewhere. Can you take me? And I go, right? I don't ask them, it'd be $50, right? I don't do that. So we're directly associated with each other, and the labor that we give each other comes about because of our face-to-face association. So we know who we are to each other because we get a self face-to-face, right? All right. So there it is. So traditional societies then, in traditional societies, here's an image. The master enjoys the labor and the products produced by the slaves or servants or the people under their command. Again, in most households, the father enjoys the labor of the children, or the children enjoy the labor of the father, not because there's money exchange, but because each of them recognize each other in this sort of system of mutuality. Okay. And so in traditional societies, again, I am master with my stick, you are servant or serf, and you shall do my bidding. You shall work because I tell you to. And the production of the commodities is something that isn't mystical at all. I need food produced, and you shall do it. Or I need horses raised, and you shall do that. And you're doing it not because you have value in the marketplace. You're doing it because the mask that you've been ensouled with demands that you do it, right? So economic production is sublimated to social values, including those of hierarchy, right? So this is a much darker, more ugly image of I think this is, I can't even tell you where this is meant to be. But this horrible image of slavery in which the the representative of the slave owner, probably not the slave owner himself, probably some sort of overseer, is ordering the this group of slaves to labor. And so the labor is being performed directly because of the power of the slave owner, and because it's an enormous system of social valuation that is, again, kind of face to face. I know you are Lord. I know you are my property, essentially, and you shall do my bidding as a result. So in this world, Marx tells us commodities aren't very mystical. We know where they come from. We know that slaves produce them. We don't have any illusions about it, right? And we know that these things that are produced that are useful were sublimated to the social values of the group. But take a look at modern production. So once you get into modern production and people have wage labor, so each of these women working in this, I think this is actually a cigarette factory from about the turn of the century. Each of these women is being paid a wage, and the value that they have, the value of their wages, how much they're paid, how much social honor they receive as a result of that wage, whether they can live a respectable life, and so on. That structure is something that happens behind their back. Their boss looks at them as boss, but their being as worker and as person is being structured behind their back through the value of commodities and the value of laboring power, and so on. More on that as we go. So this is not a world of direct social relations. This isn't face-to-face. This is a world in which people are receiving a little bit of collective social substance in the form of pay, not in the form of social honor, but in the form of pay. And the amount that they're paid is something that's determined ultimately through this massive structure of exchange, of valuation that takes place behind their back, right? Same here. So these men who are making, whatever the heck they're making, I think they're making little joints or pipes. Again, each of them, they're not being direct, so for what it's worth, so these men and these men who are producing in similar factories are producing similar things, but maybe they're useful things that they need each other in some way, but they're not associated with each other. And the structure of society itself is hidden behind the structure of commodities. So the value that each of these people have, are they heroic? Are they good? Are they none of that matters here, right? They're being paid by the hour, not because of the social recognition that they're giving to their employer. They're being paid by the hour because the machine is set up to absorb their some of their jelly, right? The social jelly that's in them. And then all of them, I just absolutely, this is one of the most horrific images you can find of these. I just love this image. There's something about it. These women working in a 19th century doll factory, damnedest thing. So they're essentially doing probably low-paid wage labor producing dolls, which are essentially electroplated children for other children to play with, while they themselves can't play with their own children because they're at work in the late 19th century, probably not for pleasure, but probably because of dire economic necessity, right? So this isn't like a career. These aren't career women. These are women who are sort of forced by the low value that they have in this structure to work. So again, I'm sorry about the gender thing here, but so again, how much value? So it isn't the social value, face to face, the ensoulment that determines the honor that these women have out in the real world. It's being determined by the amount of social wage that comes to them, and that's being determined through this immense system of exchange, right? Okay, so there it is. So in capitalism, as Marx tells us, we're living in a world where we're living in a world where commodity one and commodity two exchange, and that the value, the amount of congealed social labor in commodity one in the exchange process appears in a ghostly way in the coat, which it exchanges for. So if it's equivalent, that means that the amount of social labor necessary to produce the linen is equal to the amount of social labor necessary to produce the coat, which means that, again, they have equal amounts of social jelly in them, and therefore the value of the linen, which can never be directly seen in the linen, can be seen in the coat. So again, the price tag in a two-commodity system, these two bolts of linen have a price tag of one coat, and these two coats have essentially a price tag of two bolts of linen. But these are appearances, these are bodies, and what's underneath that price, what's underneath that body, or that socially recognized symbolic marker, is this invisible thing, this social jelly of the labor that went into its production. And so again, the people who are working in the factory, the weavers producing the linen, working for the linen capitalist, are contributing the value, the jelly of social labor, in the production process. Their social jelly is being absorbed out of them and has been accumulated in the commodity. And workers for commodity 2, the tailors that are making the coat, are laboring away, and their social jelly is being absorbed into the coat. Both sets of workers are alienated. That means that they don't own the coats or the linen that they produce. It's owned by the linen capitalist. They're paid a wage labor. And again, they're alienated. They don't own their own labor power. It's being sold by the hour to the capitalist. So in essence, during the time that they're working, they're not in control of their own life. Their life, by the hour, has died and has been granted to the linen capitalist who pays them. So work isn't life here. Work is essentially, in an alienated way, it's human energy that's being absorbed into something that these workers don't need. So these workers don't need linen. What they need are other things, and they're working to get this little piece of social substance that they can go out. But they're doing it in an alienated fashion. So the capitalist owns the linen that's produced. You're paid your wage. You're done. I'm the capitalist. I now own and possess this thing that has value because your labor is in it, right? So the reason the capitalist can make money is because the social jelly has been absorbed out of the weaver and placed in the linen, and this capitalist makes money because the jelly has been absorbed out of the tailors and absorbed into the coat. So there it is. So in modern capitalism then, the relations of people, of worker 1 and worker 2, right? These workers takes the form or the appearance of the relation between things, right? Between these two commodities. It's the linen and the coat that are related to each other, and the value is there. So that, again, there's no direct association between worker 1 and worker 2, or between the body of workers in one field and another. The entire structure is there, but it's being structured behind the back of people's recognition in this system of social accumulation that then is being monitored and determined by the exchange of things on the market. Okay? So there it is. So there's our two different systems of exchange and valuation. Okay. So again, in traditional society, you can see the worker, you know what's going on, you know who you are through the direct mirroring process of face-to-face relations, but in capital, you don't. So in capital, you wind up, again, purchasing ball bearings, and you don't know anybody who made them. And you don't understand any of the techniques or mechanism that went into the manufacture. You can't value those who produced those things. So I'm going to set this aside. So I'm going to look at something. So, yeah. So if you were living, so Marx has all those examples about like Robinson Crusoe working and so on. In other words, if you're working for yourself, if you made your own pan, when you finish the pan, you own the pan, and you look in the pan, you can see your own labor. You see yourself. In capitalism, the capitalist owns the product produced, not the people who actually labored to make it. In other words, the social jelly that is accumulated in the production of this pan, right, is the social jelly of people who aren't seen. The pan owned by the capitalist, right? The capitalist looks into that pan, there's social value in there, and that social value belongs to the capitalist. So that's what alienated labor is all about. The worker essentially disappears. The body of the worker literally disappears into the production of the commodities that are absorbed and taken away by the capitalist, and they disappear in the process. So the capitalist can be recognized in the face-to-face process of exchange as being a possessor of money and a possessor of commodities, right? They're recognized, but the workers aren't. So this idea that you look into the mirror of a commodity and you can't see the workers, you see the person who owns it, or as we're going to talk about, as we've already done, when in capitalism, when you look into a commodity, what you see is the value, and the value is equal to the amount of other commodities that it can exchange for, or the amount of money that it can exchange for. But the workers who produced it have disappeared. Okay. Yeah, so there it is. So Marx is telling us then that somewhere in every commodity is, if we could just see it, are the workers who produced it, right? That the value, that if this is sort of the appearance here of this of value of the social jelly inside of accumulated labor inside of them, and again, he's trying to help us develop a lens or sort of a magic capacity, like X-ray vision, to see into and see through those things. Yeah. Here was the image I was going to show you of the vampire nature of capital. More on that later. So this is what he's arguing, that in essence, in the production of a commodity, this is what a capitalist production system is. The worker isn't honored in the product. The product is owned by the capitalist. And in its value, then it comes into appearance in the form of money when it's exchanged. So the worker, the production system, is essentially a mechanism to absorb the living labor, here blood, of the worker. So in other words, the capitalist system, the workplace, it's an absorption machine, right? It's a machine for the absorption of human energy, of congealed human energy. As someone who came from a farming community. Yeah. So, God. Well, we'll just use this right now. But if you've ever seen, this, let's not use that image. Sorry, I have to explain that a little bit more. But yeah, like this is what capitalism is. It's a system for the absorption of jelly, of labor, of social substance, of human energy, of muscle power, as guided by a soul, a spirit, right? For absorbing that and absorbing it into a commodity that then has value. But because it's alienated, it is the capitalist that owns and controls that. It no longer is a mechanism for the worker to see oneself. So again, in Gellert's drawings, there's a certain amount of social substance in the form here of he always depicts it as sort of invisible fist of labor inside of objects and inside of money. When you look into when an object exchanges for money, it sees its value. It sees the amount of labor that's embedded within it. So that's sort of the basic idea. And again, here's that wonderful sight of the two different of the differential amount of jelly in these two different products. Okay, so let's hit commodity fetishism. We're there. We've already got it. What is commodity fetishism? All right. I'm going to show what I think is one of the worst images ever created. Of course, I just misplaced the dang thing. It's on the back of one of these. Hang on. Shoot. Yeah, I have, believe it or not, displaced it, which is sort of irritating beyond bloody belief. Is that it? Please hold. This is too good to throw away. There it is. Okay. So this is the worst image I can show you. It is racist as can be, and it is a part of the American slave South. Okay? So there's problems here in all kinds of ways, and I hesitate to show it. I apologize for a racist image, and it is there's full of all. This is full of all kinds of negativity, but we're going to put it forward anyway. All right. Marx is trying to help us see the social jelly embedded within objects, but he's telling us that in capitalism, the labor of production gets hidden. In traditional systems of production, the labor of production is on the surface. We know for a fact, right, in a pure slave system, that slaves did the work, right? Because work is dishonorable, and those with honor don't work, right? If you have honor, you own slaves. You don't work, right? And here in a serf system, right, we have no doubt who did the production. We know where the labor came from. So when we look at grain, we kind of can see and sense and taste almost the peasant sweat inside of it. All right, now this allows us to see something here. Okay, so what do we have? So this is a post-Civil War, a pre-Civil War image of a stove. It's for stove polish of all things. All right, so what do we have? We have a servant who's working, polishing the stove. And I'm assuming that this is a house slave. It's in part of the antebellum South. And so this person, this servant, has worked and has polished a stove. And this young mistress looks into the stove, this shiny mirror surface, and sees herself. That, in essence, is the secret to the fetishistic quality of commodities. Okay? So here's the way that this operates. The worker disappears. The labor, the social jelly, disappears. So what we would want to do if we had a fully a sociological eye that Marx is trying to help us get, when we look at work, the product of work, we would see the person who produced it. So I wanted to manipulate this with Photoshop, and I tried, and it looks awful, so I don't want to do it. But what you would hope is that this young woman would look into the commodity and would see the person who did the work. That the labor of the worker, the social substance that's congealed in the thing or that's been accumulated in the process of production would be visible. But it isn't. Instead, in capital, the capitalist, the owner, essentially sees themselves. And I know that's not quite right, but they see money form, and the money form belongs to them. So, I was just watching Scrooge McDuck again, who I'm absolutely fascinated by Disney's character Scrooge McDuck. Scrooge McDuck literally takes off his pants and rolls around in his money. That's what he does for fun. He actually enjoys his wealth in a way that I don't think Jeff Bezos does. Unless Jeff Bezos has a room with money and he takes off his clothes and gets in there and rolls around and licks the money and stuff. If he might do that, I don't know. Maybe that's what the Trump children do. I don't know. But Scrooge McDuck does. He's a man who's accumulated enormous amounts of other people's social energy. So he has money, which is, again, as we know, jelly, social jelly, other people's life, right, in the form of money. And Scrooge McDuck, this wealthy man, gets in there and rolls around and plays with it and tastes it and touches it and dances with it and throws it around and likes the tingle of the money and that kind of thing. He enjoys his wealth. Well, that's what we're seeing here. So the mistress hasn't worked, but she gets to enjoy the work of others, and the work of others, the social substance that actually gives value to the thing, is gone. So, in the same way that Scrooge McDuck goes in and gets to enjoy his wealth, enjoy the social substance taken from other people, in capitalism, those who possess, the possessor enjoys, not that person who possessed. So I was going to show an image of this. I'll just say it. Donald Trump is famous for putting his name in massive letters on the buildings he has either somehow owned or a bank owns, and he has somehow obtained the legal right to slap his name on it. So we know that there's a Trump hotel or a Trump building in Chicago, massive letters on it, right? And in capital, that's sort of the idea that building. And I don't think Donald Trump has picked up a screwdriver or driven a nail or, I can't imagine him floating cement or something like that. I just can't imagine it. I doubt he's ever done it. But like Scrooge McDuck, he enjoys his wealth. That wealth represents him. He looks into that mirror of that building and he sees himself. And in capitalism, that's the way we all do. We look into accumulated wealth, accumulated social substance, accumulated social jelly. And we don't see society, we see the capitalist who possesses it, right? So this would be, if Trump owned this, if this was Donald or Ivanka looking into this, it would say Trump on it, right? It would be a representation of them. They would see themselves. And in capitalism, we, even the person who made the work, right, of this poor smiling servant here, would look into the results of labor and wouldn't see her, and wouldn't see the social substance of her and all the other workers that made and polished the thing. Instead, they would see a reflection of the bearer or the representative of capital, the capitalist. So the mirror surface of objects, right, reflects back the owner, the possessor. It doesn't reflect back the worker. So this is, again, kind of the secret of the whole thing. And to Marx, this is the secret of capitalism as a social system. Unlike every other system of labor, including slavery, the worker disappears. And that the products of labor appear to be the products or the property of. They appear to reflect back the self of the capitalist. And so again, great wealth that's accumulated. Jeff Bezos' billions, right? Or Elon Musk's billions. But this is a mirror for them. And you look at okay. So what the main thing is labor's lost, right? Love's labor lost. Labor is lost, in Shakespeare's terms, right? So it's gone. So there it is. So social values. So if we value hard work, we value people who are kind to others. This servant appears to be very kind to this person, hasn't kicked her dog or anything like that. Very kind person. We value that, but that social value has been overwritten, disappeared into the capitalist system, where the social substance is lost. So the mistress, defined in terms of the slave's work or the servant's work, her deference, her obedience, literally sees herself as reflected in the work of the slave. So again, if there's a slave system, there's that direct deference and demeanor going on. But in a capitalist system, again, the worker disappears entirely. And what you have instead is the social substance has been absorbed out of the worker, that now has taken the form of this commodity or of money that then appears to reflect back the capitalist. Okay, so I think we can just, let's wrap this up then. So in the Fetishism of Commodities chapter, then, his argument is that the structure of social relations is masked behind the apparent relationship of things. That the commodities as exchanged appear to have a relationship with each other, but in the end, that's actually social structure itself. So the relationship between men, gendered people, takes on the appearance of a relationship between things. Value, therefore, does not stalk about with a label describing what it is. It converts every product into a social hieroglyphic. So there it is. So what is value? It's the people who worked, right? It's the social substance, the life that has died, the life that has died in the production of the thing, but it doesn't have its label. It's not there. We see money, but of course, what is money? Well, money is nothing more than a socially recognized indicator of the amount of social jelly that has died in the production, right? So the val disappears. And so the quantities of value vary continually, independently of the will or the action of the producers. Their own social action takes the form of the action of objects which rule the producers instead of being ruled by them. That's the key. So you're a producer and you're making something, and instead of you and the person that you're interacting with in this massive system having any kind of direct social relation, it doesn't. It's the object that you're produced that relate to each other, and that value system then dominates life. So social values disappear and value dominates and rules. So in the midst of all the accidental, ever-fluctuating exchange relations between the products, the labor time socially necessary for the production, forcibly it asserts itself like an overriding law of nature. So we now have a new law of capitalist society, the law of value, okay? And the law of value is that the labor time socially necessary to produce a thing that is absorbed in the production of a thing determines the relation of that thing to other things that are produced, which ultimately means that the members of society who produce, consume, and own, and all of that is structured by this as the primary law of society.
So the determination of the magnitude of value by labor time is therefore a secret hidden behind the apparent fluctuations of the relative value of commodities. Again, underneath the surface of a commodity then are the workers, but we can't see the workers, we can't see the production, we can only see the surface. So underneath the price, the value as represented in the moment in the terms of money, right? The money underneath the price tag is hidden the labor. So if we could do it, if we could show the social substance, if we could reveal the social substance again, we would see that in the shoe that has a price of say $150, right there's a shoe, right? So in that shoe, if we could remove it there, okay, in that shoe, now we have a shoeless doll. But anyway, that shoe, if we could see not just the price, but if we could see the social substance underneath the price, right? If we could see the social labor, we might be able to see that, the blood of children or of slave-like workers in Southeast Asia or something. We could see that, but that's hidden. So that's Marx's idea that the secret hidden under the apparent fluctuations, the relative values of commodities, is actually this immense structure of social relations that we know of as value. All right, so there's no fetishism of commodities. So in other words, commodities don't seem to have this kind of immense power, right? This dominant power in other systems. In the system of slavery we just looked at, there is no doubt, right? Nobody thinks that cotton and the price of cotton is what's determining whether slaves have value or slave owners have value. We know that the system of slavery itself is a social structure that's obdurate, that's linked to power, that's linked to violence, that links to law and other things. And it isn't being determined by the fluctuation of cotton prices. Instead, in capitalism, it appears, that these objects have a fetish quality, and that the fluctuation of values determines everything else. So that's it. So other economic systems, it doesn't exist. In medieval feudalism, it doesn't. Slavery, it doesn't. So anything like personal servitude, again, the master-slave, the personal recognition determines social relations. And the economic production thing happens as a result of that, right? So economic production is subsumed under the larger process of social value. In capitalism, social values are overwritten and obliterated even by value itself. So workers in rural America who are upset and are being encouraged to be upset about workers coming from elsewhere stealing their jobs are kind of or disrupting their traditional communities, or encouraging gayness, or encouraging trans rights, or something like that, and they want to defend the traditional value of their place. They're kind of missing that the law that's dominating everything, the force that's dominating everything, hidden behind, right, that's determining their life, is really value. And so this vast structure of absorption of human energy absorbed into commodities and then exchanged in a market that then determines how much of that socially necessary labor time for production gets realized, and so on, that structure of value is determining their worth and the structure of society itself. All right. Families are not like this. I just love on page 326. If we had producers' cooperatives, we had something like a socialist society. It's not going to have commodity fetishism. Christianity, he argues, especially Protestant Christianity, is an excellent reflection of commodity relations. That's on page 326. Again, I'm working on a book on economic theology. This is one of the key passages. So he argues here, as I do, that religion is a reflection of social relations, that the structure of God and the structure of the relationship between believers in God is often a reflection of the social relations of production, right? So in an aristocratic world of medieval Christianity, God doesn't look like a Palestinian or a Jewish person of relative poverty who is executed by the state for sedition. They don't look like that, right? Instead, God looks like the aristocratic elite, like a king here, right? and even a kind of Nordic-looking king, right, or a French king, rather than a person from from Palestine or something. So in an aristocratic system, God takes on the mask of elites, or another way, elites take on the mask of God. They tend to, again, be kind of overlaid upon each other, so that the God and the local elite tend to be substitutions for each other. If that's true, then Marx argues that in a system of capital, you're going to have a reworking of religion. And we know that in that Christianity was reworked in the Protestant Reformation in places that had really vibrant early capitalism. So Protestant Christianity and capitalism go together, hand in glove, basically, right? And so, and the reason he argues here is that Protestant Christianity has developed the cultus of the abstract man, deism, and so on. So it's this idea that we're all in this together, the abstract person is or something. At any rate, the economic theology of Protestant religion tends to mirror the relations of value, right? More on that as we go. This is also Max Weber's big project, right? Yeah. Those ancient social organisms of production are, as compared with bourgeois society, simple and transparent. But they are founded either on the immature development of man individually, right? Primitive tribal communities and so on. So traditional societies tend to worship nature. And then he goes on and says that in our time, however, we wind up with this fetishism. Forms of social production that preceded the bourgeois form are treated by the bourgeoisie in much the same ways the fathers of the church treated pre-Christian religion. So we know, this is the bottom of page 327. So we know that many variants of Protestantism look at sort of traditional Catholicism or traditional Christianity as essentially blasphemy, right? Or idolatry. The prohibition against icons, or the prohibition against the magic of the mass, that kind of thing, right? They view it as an abomination. And so, and because it was linked to a system of values instead of a system of values. So at any rate, so in the bourgeois production, in bourgeois society, you get this incredibly elaborate fetish quality. So no chemist has ever discovered exchange value. Use value may be a thing that interests men. It is no part of us as objects. What, however, does belong to us as objects is our value. Our natural intercourse as commodities proves it. In the eyes of each other, we are nothing but exchange values. Now listen how these commodities speak through the... So if commodities could speak, that's what they would say. Our bodies don't matter. We relate to each other as value. We relate to each other only in terms of the social substance. And we know that in essence that there are variants of Christianity that have very similar notions of this. It is the abstract idea of human, like maybe even the Calvinist God, where whether you're saved or damned is determined by laws that you cannot quite comprehend. It's predetermined, and therefore you are saved or damned not based upon your own merit, not anything about your social value, but it's based upon some bizarre structure of valuation of which you know nothing, right? But must nevertheless bow down before. All right, so there it is. So I think we've got everything we need. So Marx is telling us that we are in a different form of society, one that is that has completely altered the way that people relate to each other. So the traditional direct relation of human to human, and we get a self from that, or of humans through ritual to a collective representation in the form of a god, and we get a self from that, has been displaced and overwritten by a system that in which value is simply the accumulated energy absorbed out of human beings behind their backs, right, in a system of production, accumulated into commodities that are then exchanged, and that the relative value of laborers, the relative value of individuals, the relative value of different forms of production, modes of production, and so on, is being determined behind our backs
in systems of exchange. So this is a different society that is, again, overwritten, overmastered, overlaid all traditional forms of social value. The gods have been downgraded, right? They are secondary in capital. We know that most businesses are open Sunday. So even the day set aside in the Christian Bible or the Judeo-Christian tradition as the day of worship is downgraded now, fundamentally downgraded, and it is now a day of continued accumulation. Religious holidays, even Christmas itself, right, has been downgraded as a moment where we reflect upon, our sins, or reflect upon the glory of God, or reflect upon, the value of the social values that we all adhere to. Instead, it's been downgraded and is now this moment of hyper consumption and hyper realization of value in the economic sense. So again, Marx is trying to tell us two things as we leave. Number one, most of us work, and that is our primary. That's the primary way that society and capitalism values us. We are valued through the labor that is absorbed in us, from us in the production of goods and services. We're workers first. We are workers first. This is essentially a structure of production. And the way that we live is through obtaining the means of life and something like honor and respect as a result of our work. But again, there's all kinds of obfuscation going on about that. So we tend not to relate to each other as workers. And the system is set up by default so that we cannot see how we relate to other workers. So we're living in a worker-to-worker system of exchange. It's what value is. It's a system of worker-to-worker exchange, and that all gets lost. And so traditional values, such as they continue to exist, are under threat. There's no question they're under threat. They are doomed to extinction, or at least doomed to transformation and perversion as these traditional values become simply mechanisms of marketing and mechanisms of branding and mechanisms of consumption, right? But they are doomed, and they are being perverted and changed. But the agent that does this is value, is capital, right? So we're workers first, but most of us don't see ourselves that way. We don't vote that way. We don't identify that way. We don't talk to each other that way. We will talk to each other about almost anything except work. And so Marx is trying to sort of reveal this social unconscious, this background structure, right, that lies behind our world and that determines our fate and determines really our future. Okay, so we're workers first. This is a system of worker-to-worker exchange that we can't quite see and comprehend, and that values, social values, are under threat from value, even though many of us can't see it. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you found this useful.